Hello and welcome. You're watching Race to Power. My name is Mohammed Saleh. And let's start this special broadcast by taking a look at some breaking news that's in fact just coming. Now, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to the American President Donald Trump, and this comes amidst the ongoing India-US trade talks. Now, the two leaders have reviewed the progress in the US-India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership over a phone call. And they've also expressed satisfaction with the steady strengthening of the bilateral cooperation in all domains. The leaders also exchanged views on expanding cooperation in trade, critical technologies, energy, defense and security. Now, both leaders also agreed to work closely to address the shared challenges and to advance common interests. Now, the Indian Prime Minister and President Trump underlined the importance of sustaining the momentum in the shared efforts to enhance bilateral trade. Now, the two leaders agreed to remain in touch, and the Modi-Trump call took place at a time when a delegation led by the US Deputy Trade Representative Rick Switzer is currently in India for the trade talks. Now, the Indian Prime Minister in fact took to X to inform about the meeting. He has said, and I quote him here, "Had a very warm and an engaging conversation with President Trump. We reviewed the progress in our bilateral relations and discussed regional and international developments. India and the United States will continue to work together for global peace, stability and prosperity." Now, the talks between the Indian Prime Minister and President Trump have come just a week after Russian President Vladimir Putin had visited New Delhi for the 23rd Annual India-Russia Summit, where both countries had boosted their strategic ties. And to tell us more on this, we're joined on our broadcast by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York. Susan, this of course is a very crucial phone call between the Indian Prime Minister and the American President. Tell us more.
Very important indeed, Mohammed. As you mentioned, it also really comes at a time when the United States has sent a trade delegation to India, of course, to talk about those thorny issues when it comes to tariffs. And also it comes at just a day after we heard from lawmakers in Washington, D.C., when they were briefing the Senate that they have received the best deal yet from the Indian side when it comes to trade deals and tariffs. So one has to wonder whether or not a trade deal is close, and it's so close that it was time for the two leaders to talk and hash out any remaining differences. Of course, we'll get more clarity on that with each passing hour. This is breaking news. But I think it's also very interesting that from the readout, we hear that they also talked about the new compact framework between the two countries. That's the initiative focused on accelerating military cooperation, commerce and technology, really an all-encompassing trade agreement if it does go through, and bilateral agreements between the two countries, that a lot of it is separate from those tariff talks that are taking place.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates. We'll, of course, come back to you as this story continues to develop. All right, now the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is facing some fresh challenges. Washington is pushing him to hold elections under martial law, and Zelensky now must strike a balance between maintaining democratic governance and ensuring national survival. Now, just a day after expressing his readiness to hold elections, Volodymyr Zelensky knocked the door of the country's parliament. He has asked the parliamentarians to lay out their vision for elections. Now, the parliament where his party holds absolute majority.
Як це провести? Як це зробити під ударами, під ракетами, щодо наших військових, питання, як вони будуть голосувати, ви це знаєте, і не хочу повторювати. І друге питання – законодавча основа для легітимності проведення виборів. І так як це питання сьогодні піднімає президент Сполучених Штатів Америки, наші партнери, я відповім дуже коротко. Дивіться, я готовий до виборів. Мало того, я прошу зараз, і заявляю це відкрито, Сполучені Штати Америки допомогти мені. Можна разом з європейськими колегами забезпечити безпеку для проведення виборів.
Now, the last presidential election that took place in Ukraine was held in 2019, and under the normal circumstances, the next elections should have been held back in 2024. But martial law had put the elections on hold. So as things stand at the moment, the next elections are to be held within 6 months after martial law is lifted. Now, President Zelensky has said that he's ready for the polls within the next 90 days, but can he really do that? Let's take a look at some of the challenges that stand in the way of elections in Ukraine at the moment. Now, Ukraine is currently under martial law. The country's constitution suspends all elections during such periods. Now, Zelensky will have to find a way around this provision and make sure that the electoral process still remains free and fair. Now, 1/5 of Ukraine is currently under Russia's control. So what happens to the areas that are under the control of Russia? Now, there are 6 regions of concern. The Russian forces are deep inside Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, while the front line is still open in Sumy and in the Kharkiv region. Now, funding war and elections is going to be the next big challenge, and according to the Central Election Committee's 2023 calculations, the collective cost of Ukraine's presidential and parliamentary elections could go up to $350 million. So how will Ukraine manage to fund it at a time when the country is spending and double than its budget for the war? The next big challenge is voting rights of the Ukrainians who fled the war. Almost about 6 to 7 million Ukrainians have fled the country since the war began. They're living abroad in temporary protections. Ensuring their participation in the elections will be another logistical challenge. The similar challenge will also be faced by soldiers who are engaged in fighting. Allowing them to exercise their voting rights might weaken their position on the front line. The final challenge would be to get the voters to the polling booths. Russia and Ukraine carry out drone attacks deep inside each other's territory. The Russian drones have hit cities as far west as Lviv in Ukraine. So how will Ukraine now convince the voters to step out and cast their ballot while the threat of drones and missiles from Russia looms over the Ukrainian skies? And to tell us how feasible this is, we are now joined on the broadcast by Dr. Glenn Deason. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. He's joining us all the way from Oslo. Dr. Deason, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed his willingness to hold elections within the next 90 days. But the question is of feasibility at a time when the martial law is in place. Do you think this can be done?
Well, it's going to be difficult, but still it's seen as necessary. Both the United States and Russia thinks that Zelensky continuing to hold on to power is a key obstruction towards finding a peaceful settlement. But the problem of an election is, well, it's real. How do you have elections during under a war zone? How do you, as you just mentioned, how will the soldiers get to vote? And also for the millions who fled the country, do they also get to vote? We have millions of Ukrainians in Russia as well. Shouldn't they be allowed to vote? So there's a lot of questions which have to be addressed. And but it also seems as if Zelensky would like to use this opportunity or as at least condition election on bringing NATO into Ukraine. That is, he suggested that in order to have elections for 60 to 90 days, that is 2 to 3 months, NATO will have to essentially make sure that there's no attacks. So I'm not sure what this means. Is this intercepting drones? Is it's really unclear, and this is a non-starter for Russia because this kind of falls within the same ploy as we've previously seen, that is imposing essentially a temporary ceasefire. But as soon as there's a temporary ceasefire, there's no incentive anymore for Ukraine or the Europeans or the Americans, for that sake, to make any concessions in terms of restoring Ukraine's neutrality or accepting these territorial concessions.
You know, you've touched upon several very interesting scenarios that could play out. Now, the Russian leadership, that's Vladimir Putin, does not recognize Volodymyr Zelensky to be a legitimate ruler in Kiev, for quite some time now. He's made that pretty clear. Do you think elections could be one of the ways in which probably the Russian leadership and also the American leadership would want to try and get rid of Volodymyr Zelensky so that some kind of a peace deal could be agreed on the terms that Moscow and Washington want, which Kiev under Volodymyr Zelensky would not agree to?
Well, it's possible, but the legitimacy is a key issue as well, which the Russians have raised, because the concern, according to Moscow, is that if whatever Zelensky will sign, that later on a future Ukrainian government can say that this was illegitimate, given that Zelensky was illegitimate since he overstayed his presidential term. Now, so there's a lot of questions tied into how they can find someone to essentially sign under on whatever peace agreements there will be. And the United States also, of course, I suspect that they have been behind leaking some of the bigger stories about this, the scandals about corruption in Ukraine, because I think they also see that there's a need to push Zelensky aside to get the peace agreement. And so, no, I do think that it's going to be, well, this is primarily a proxy war between the US and Russia. So I think the Americans and the Russians will have to first come to a settlement, and then they will likely push it on Ukraine.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Glenn Deason, for joining us from Oslo and getting us that perspective there. All right, let's now shift our attention to the other big story that we are tracking on Race to Power, because the tensions between the United States and Venezuela have now taken a very sharp and a very compelling turn. The American forces claim that they have now seized a massive oil tanker just off Venezuela's coast. So far, Donald Trump had been talking about drug trafficking from Venezuela, but it is an oil tanker that's now been seized from Venezuela. And this incident marks the first time that the United States has confiscated a Venezuelan oil tanker since it imposed sanctions in 2019. Now, these sanctions were imposed to restrict Venezuela's oil exports as a means of pressuring the Venezuelan government. Now, video footage that's been shared by the US Attorney General Pam Bondi shows the American troops descending from a helicopter onto the tanker's deck. The armed soldiers quickly took control of the ship's bridge with their rifles raised as they secured the vessel. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, explained that the tanker was part of an illicit network that was moving sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. Now, the American President Donald Trump addressed the situation, highlighting the astonishing size of the tanker and called it the largest ever seized by the U.S. authorities. And the move comes during a huge U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean and the strikes that have taken place on the alleged drug boats by the Americans.
You know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening, so you'll be seeing that later, and you'll be talking about that later with some other people.
Now, Venezuela immediately condemned the move, accusing Washington of outright theft and calling the seizure an act of international piracy with some of the world's largest proven oil reserves. The Venezuelan authorities have accused Washington of attempting to strip the country of its vital resources. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro demanded an end to U.S. intervention in his nation. He called once again for a unified South America, drawing on the historic vision of Gran Colombia. Now, Maduro took to the streets of Caracas, leading his supporters in a march through the capital. At a rally, he sang and also danced to a new song with the refrain, "Don't worry, be happy."
No al intervencionismo.
We say no to interventionism, no to plans for destabilization and regime change. The U.S. government should focus on governing its own country.
Now, Trump's administration has piled a lot of pressure on Maduro in recent months, deploying a fleet of warships and the world's largest aircraft carrier under the pretext of combating drug trafficking. It's also carried out deadly strikes under Operation Southern Spear on more than 20 alleged drug boats in the region, killing at least about 87 people.
Is that true?
No.
That you made a decision on that?
No, it's not true.
Now, Bangladesh appears to be ready to turn the page after former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's ouster. The country is now heading for fresh elections after last year's July uprising, a student-led protest that ended Sheikh Hasina's 15-year reign. Now, the country's chief election commissioner appeared on national TV to announce the dates, and the election for all 300 constituencies will be held on the 12th of February in 2026. And along with the national elections, a referendum on the landmark Democratic Reform Charter will also take place on the same day. Now, Bangladesh will go to polls with a completely changed political arena. Sheikh Hasina's Awami League has been barred from contesting elections, and this leaves the political battleground open for two major political rivals, the former Prime Minister Khalida Zia-led BNP and the Jamaat-e-Islami. Now, the organization that was banned by Sheikh Hasina under the anti-terrorism law. The Jamaat is gaining significant ground in Bangladesh. Its core vote bank remains students who led the July uprising of 2024. And earlier this year, the student wing of the Jamaat-e-Islami won a major university poll in Bangladesh. The former Prime Minister Khalida Zia is critically ill. She's been receiving some intensive care at a hospital in Dhaka for more than a week now, and doctors are considering to move her to the United Kingdom for advanced treatment, and that is where her son Tariq Rahman currently resides. Meanwhile, the question also remains on inclusivity of the elections. With Hasina out of the picture and Khalida Zia's absence from active politics, the Jamaat may make some significant inroads into Bangladeshi politics. South Africans are losing trust and they are showing low levels of confidence in political leaders and public institutions. New research conducted by the South African Reconciliation Barometer from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation has said that the Government of National Unity has done precious little to change public perception about the country's political leadership. Now, GNU is a coalition party that was formed post the 2024 elections, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, who currently heads the government. Now, the IGR 2025 is a survey that was conducted 1 year into the first term of GNU, and the data from the survey was gathered between July and August, which included face-to-face interviews with over 2,000 people throughout the country. The findings of the survey reportedly echo the one that was conducted by the Afrobarometer, a pan-African research network which found that nearly 50% of all South Africans will prefer a military regime to a civilian government in power, in a rise from the 28% support in 2022. Now, the Afrobarometer survey reveals that almost 7 out of 10 South Africans were dissatisfied with the way the democracy functions in the country. However, 49% believe that democracy was preferable to other government systems. South African Reconciliation Barometer is a crucial national public opinion survey tracking South Africans' opinions towards reconciliation, social cohesion, transformation, and democratic governance, as well as measuring progress and challenges since the time of apartheid. And it serves as a key resource for policy, debate, and academic research to understand the nation up close.
Every government with the required respect and required dignity.
The Bolivian government says that the former President Luis Arce has been arrested in the capital city of La Paz as part of an investigation into an alleged graft case worth nearly $700 million. Now, under the probe, Arce had faced a slew of charges, from authorizing transfers to the public treasury to the personal accounts of political leaders. The Bolivian government had said that the graft was allegedly committed by Arce when he was an economy minister under the then President Evo Morales. The demonstrators in La Paz are in favor of the high-profile arrest, called for him to be sent to the maximum security prison. Now, Arce, who left office last month, is yet to comment on this matter, but his former colleague, Marianela Prada, who served as the minister to presidency under him, said that Arce was innocent and described the arrest as a total abuse of power.
The events under investigation date back to when Mr. Luis Arce Catacora was economy minister. Therefore, under the political constitution of the state, they are not subject to a trial of responsibilities, which means that the ordinary justice system, the ordinary jurisdiction, is in charge of judging any people who may be found responsible.
Now, this also comes weeks after a political shift that ended nearly 2 decades of leftist rule in Bolivia, dominated by the Movimiento al Socialismo party that Arce had represented. Now, Arce's presidency was marred by critical shortages of fuel and foreign currency that sparked numerous protests. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. Thanks for watching.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. To some, it's an extreme ideology. To others, it's the very soul of India. To some, it's rebellion. To others, it's a principle of nation building. Coming soon to challenge perceptions in RSS centenary year, Kesariya at 100.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening. As we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. To some, it's an extreme ideology. To others, it's the very soul of India. To some, it's rebellion. To others, it's a principle of nation building. Coming soon to challenge perceptions in RSS Centenary Year, Kesariya at 100.
Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Crime is your front row seat to darkness.